Warning: the following program may contain coarse language, strong violence, and brief sexuality. This video is designed for a mature audience, and viewer discretion is advised. Childe of Shade Reviews, Review Number 1. Ni No Kuni, Wraith of the White Witch.
So, this is the child who will save the world.
In today's times, JRPGs have mostly fallen out of the spotlight for most gamers. Fewer and fewer of these games are coming to the West, and only a handful of titles are reaching the same heights of popularity and quality as such titles like Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy VII. However, in January 2013, Red 5 released their co-produced project, Ni No Kuni, Wraith of the White Witch, a callback to JRPGs of old, with emphasis on classic gameplay and a unique visual aesthetic produced by Studio Ghibli. Today for Childe of Shade Reviews, I will be reviewing this modern callback. Does it reach the same heights of the classical games of its genre, or should it be reviled like the much despised Tales of Earthsea? Ladies and gentlemen, tune in and find Ni No Kuni's story follows the adventures of Oliver, an average young boy who lives with his mother in the quiet town of Motorville. Oliver is an obedient child who largely lives a carefree life until he is approached by his friend Philip. Philip tells him about his invention that he built and invites Oliver to test it out. Against his mother's wishes, Oliver sneaks out with Philip and goes to try out Philip's invention. Unfortunately, after a brief accident, tragedy strikes and Oliver is left an orphan after his mother saves him from drowning. A few days later, we find Oliver mourning over the loss of his mother and fully expressing his grief. That is, until his doll, Mr. Drippy, magically comes to life. Mr. Drippy then tells Oliver about another world where souls are connected to this one, and that he can save his mother by saving this other world. While the tale for Ni No Kuni starts standard enough, it's the journey that really sets it apart from most JRPGs. While characters don't get much characterization, they generally get enough to diversify them and get some emotional impact out of it. The standouts being the main antagonists of the game, who completely steal the spotlight and add immense emotional drive to the tale. However, the biggest flaw of the story is how stretched out and bloated it is. Half the time spent in Ni No Kuni's 40-hour main quest is usually spent running around the world doing quests and running errands, which almost always involves collecting 3 items of some significant importance. Want to become a wizard, Oliver? Seek the 3 sages. Want to defeat Shadar, Oliver? Seek the 3 stones. Oh, you found the 3 stones, Oliver? Now go save the 3 kingdoms. If these quests were simple and short, this wouldn't be such a big problem, but this takes up a majority of the game's playtime. Playtime, might I add, that could be spent developing characters. Overall, Ni No Kuni's story is a heartwarming tale about healing a broken heart and learning to overcome disaster, and many games nowadays can definitely learn from what Ni No Kuni has to say. Ni No Kuni is first and foremost an RPG, and it proudly wears that honor on its sleeve. Oliver uses a variety of spells to help him on his quest, and sometimes he even has to look in his wizard's compendium to solve some puzzles. Oliver's wizard's compendium is an immense source of lore and knowledge. You can find formulas for alchemy, look up the weaknesses and locations of various familiars and creatures, and even learn a couple stories about how this world was shaped. This little bit of immersion adds to the overall experience of the game and really makes you feel like an actual wizard reciting the spells. However, during the course of your 50 to 60 hour playthrough, you will be spending a lot of that time traveling from city to city, and this gets very tedious until you acquire a dragon that lets you soar through the air at a breakneck pace. Another, and by far the biggest problem, is the game's combat, which is less than stellar and tends to be mindless whenever you're not fighting a boss. While the boss battles are fine, players will constantly find themselves trying to figure out what familiar works best against another familiar. I found most of the abilities that were given pretty useless when it came to increasing stats like attack, defense, or evasiveness, and I spent most of my time spamming attack, heal, and defensive stances against enemies. Even worse is the friendly AI, who often spent most battles dead or sabotaging my tactics. While you can control other members of your party, it only highlights just how bad the AI is. Oftentimes when I was trying to steal items from other familiars, my friendly AI would come in and kill that familiar, not allowing me to steal the item and thus leaving me itemless. Equipping weapons is also a chore due to various familiars you amass having different types of equipment that they can hold. If you want to maintain a balanced team, you're going to need somewhere between like 40 and 50 different types of weapons, and we'll be constantly switching between the various weapons to compare stats and try to figure out which one goes best with which familiar. And this is really the biggest failing of Ni No Kuni. The gameplay is just not up to today's standards, and because of this, the game suffers for it. I really wanted to like the RPG elements more, but poor quest design and an underwhelming combat system just kept dragging it down. If you have been watching this review for very long, you will probably notice that the pictures are very colorful and gorgeous to look at. Your eyes aren't lying to you. This game just looks this fantastic. Studio Ghibli is known for making some fantastic looking films, see Princess Mononoke or Howl's Moving Castle, heck, even Ponyo. And their transition from film to gaming has been an almost seamless one. Characters and locations look like they've been pulled directly from its Studio Ghibli animation, and are not at all decremented by the 3D modeling. The art takes Studio Ghibli's signature style, simplistic yet expressive. Attention to detail is a big factor for what makes the presentation of Ni No Kuni so special. Little details like Oliver shivering in the snow, or trying to keep his balance while hopping on some stones, really add to the overall presentation. It's tiny details like this that really sets the game apart from most AAA games that have an emphasis on gritty realism. The 3D modeling is superb, and there's a wide palette of colors on display here. Also noteworthy is that the game's frame rate rarely dropped at all, and when it did, it only happened during the most hectic of battles. But no doubt everything about this game's visuals are superb, and even though some of the menus and animations are a bit overused, in summary, Ni No Kuni is a fantastic looking game, and I feel that it will continue to look fantastic for years to come. Sound-wise, Ni No Kuni does a very good job of providing an English translation. While there are occasional cheesy lines here and there, the actors really do a good job of selling the world, and conveying emotional scenes when they are needed. Not every scenario has voice acting, but there's enough to make you take notice. The music was composed by Joe Hisaishi, and performed by the Tokyo Philharmonic Orchestra. They did an absolutely fantastic job. Soundtracks like Ni No Kuni are rare in video games these days, with most usually having pulse-pounding electronic music, or rather generic scenery pieces. Ni No Kuni's soundtrack feels like it was pulled straight from a Ghibli film, carrying all the whimsy and awe that comes with it. Of course, there are a couple of tracks that definitely get old after a while. I'm Looking at You battle music. But overall, those tracks are just small annoying cousins to an emotional and extravagant soundtrack. Tracks like the lead up to the decisive battle, or World Map, really grasp the atmosphere of exploring this other world, and definitely spring goosebumps on your flesh. Don't believe me? Take a listen. Did you get goosebumps? I did. And while some tracks are not as superb as others, Ni No Kuni's soundtrack and overall sound design definitely leave a positive mark, and ultimately add so much more than it subtracts. Ni No Kuni is a very interesting case of a game. It certainly takes inspiration from classic JRPGs, and in terms of presentation, shines bright like a star, but consequently, the gameplay can be described as serviceable at best, and extremely flawed, if not broken, at worst. The story, while stretched out far too wide, is extremely captivating, and leads to big emotional payoff, and can even provide heartwarming scenes of sympathy and jubilance. All in all, though, I definitely feel this game is worth playing for anyone who loves story and atmosphere in their games. And so, after giving it some thought and collecting 3 of everything, I have decided to give scores to story, gameplay, presentation, sound, and overall enjoyment. Starting with story, which I give a score of 8.75 due to immense emotional weight but suffering from a slogging pace. Gameplay, I give a 6.5 due to the awkward combat system and expansive amount of options that prove it to be a bit too much. Presentation gets an outstanding score of 9.2 for its incredible attention to detail and fantastic 3D modeling. Similarly, sound gets a soaring score of 9.0 for its solid voice work and an incredible moving and inspiring soundtrack. Last but not least, there's enjoyment, which also gets a solid score of 8.5 for its whimsical atmosphere and unique take on the adventure genre. Tallying these scores up, I ultimately come to a final conclusion, giving Ni No Kuni an overall great score of 84%, giving the recommendation to buy it. While it has its problems, Ni No Kuni is a solid RPG through and through. Combat can be a mess, but almost everything else stands out in its own unique way. If you can stomach the combat and grit your teeth through the tedious parts of the game, I feel that the payoff is really worth it, and that the game will touch you in ways that few games ever do. For other game recommendations, I point you to Pokemon, pretty much any version of that series, for its similar combat style, although it's more accessible and moves at a much more bearable pace than Ni No Kuni ever does. Another recommendation is Chrono Trigger for its compelling story and colorful characters. Hopefully between those two, you will find something to your liking. At the time of this recording, May 27, 2014, Ni No Kuni is available from most North American retailers for around $17 to $20 new. And it is also available on PlayStation Network for $20 too. Keep in mind this review was solely done for the North American PS3 version of the game, due to that being the only available version in North America. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is my review. Thank you for watching my first ever review. And if there were any issues or complaints that you have with this review, I would advise you to leave a comment in the comments section. Any to all criticism is appreciated, and I will do my best to read through them thoroughly. Once again, I thank you all for watching this video, and wish you all a wonderful evening. This is Childe of Shade, signing off, and I will see you next time.